Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 5 and lesson 4. This week we'll go over social and environmental justice. So, social justice in particular is one of the core aspects of sustainability. Social equity basically is social justice. They can be used more or less interchangeably. So, obviously, this is important. So, we'll look at it from a couple different angles. But I did put this little blurb here at the beginning of the lesson just to note that if we're going to achieve a sustainable society globally and domestically and everywhere, um, we need to do our best to eliminate poverty. You may recall that Herman Daly addressed that in his reading or his writing last lesson. When he said that one of the primary goals of a good economy should be to eliminate poverty. So we need to address that and consider that. Remember, even though most of the people that are low income in the world are in sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, there we know there's people everywhere that are suffering, even in very, very wealthy countries such as the United States. I forget what our poverty rate is, but it's in the double digits, which is unacceptable in a good society. And so that's really important. But I also want to highlight, this sentence here that the goal of social equity is not to just give people things per se. Sometimes that's what you need to do. What the goal really is to empower people to get those things for themselves. So that's really what a socially equitable, a socially just society is, one in which that everyone's able to achieve all that they're capable of. And that's it. I mean, it sounds simple. Obviously, it's easier said than done. There's a lot that goes into it, a lot that contributes to and takes away from people's quality of life. But that's the goal. It's not to just give, it's not socialism, right? Like we want everyone to have the opportunity to achieve all that they're capable of. Really important. Okay. And so that's social justice. Um, Now, we'll go over some other definitions of social justice. I always like using this one from the National Association of Social Workers, and that's the view that everyone deserves equal economic, political, and social opportunities. Sorry, social rights and opportunities. So the key here is that they deserve equal opportunities and rights. That's key. Again, they don't necessarily deserve to have the same of everything, but everyone should have the same rights. Everyone should have the same opportunities. Whether or not they take advantage of those opportunities, that's where it takes some self motivation, and not everybody's going to achieve equal things. Um, we're given we're born with different abilities. We have different capabilities based on a variety of factors. So we're not all going to be the same. Like that's life, right? Like it's good. We're going to end up unequal in some way. But the goal, again, is just to make sure that inequality is not due to lack of opportunity or lack of right. And you could go down the board with examples both historically and contemporarily. Um, you look at the way that Black Americans were treated for the longest time, the way Native Americans were treated, the way that women were lesser citizens, like women couldn't vote until 1920, which is crazy in the United States. Um, and so this happens all over the world, right? Like I'm not just picking on the United States. There's inequality everywhere. So the goal of any good society, no matter where you are, should be that everyone has the opportunity to achieve what they're capable of, and in order to do that, they need to have equal economic, political, and social rights and opportunities. And I go into some explanation of what each of those are. Um, there's a nice video here about environmental justice, which there's no universal definition, but it can be thought of as everyone in society having an equal share of all environmental burdens and benefits. Okay, so just because I'm wealthy, I shouldn't have access to cleaner air and cleaner water and more nature and all that. Um, or it's because live a certain socioeconomic status in some other country where I'm seen as a lesser citizen. That shouldn't be the case in terms of my access to clean air, clean water, and these other environmental goods. And the flip side of that is just because, there's research all over the place on this, all over the world, that if you're low income or otherwise marginalized, you're more likely to live near a landfill or a power plant. So that's the environmental burden side of things. Whereas the environmental benefit side of things is, they clean air, clean water, and so forth. So that's what environmental justice is. It's an extension of social justice, but it is a specific um, discipline and avenue, topic of discussion and research. So I did want to point that out the difference. And then I just go over a few case studies to describe some social and environmental justice issues. This one's in Camden, New Jersey, and then this one's over in India. Okay, so that's your social and environmental justice. And then there's this really, I would say, interesting and controversial in some ways reading about life called Lifeboat Ethics. This is our old friend Garrett Hardin, he of the Tragedy of the Commons. And he wrote this article um, after, I believe, the Tragedy of the Commons. So I'll just let you pour through it. It's interesting. I'm interested to hear what you think. There's some sort of good and bad points here. But I'll hopefully help you in the quiz questions this week. Think about some of those points and then kind of go over some of that in the lecture as well. So, lifeboat ethics, not as famous as the tragedy of the commons, but this it is discussed in certain sustainability circles and certainly in some classes like this because there's some, I guess, interesting points of discussion. You'll see what I mean when you read the article. And then finally, we will end up on neo-colonialism. Okay, so neo-colonialism, which you may guess by the name, is new colonialism. So colonialism, like there's really no colonies anymore. The colonial period, the United States was a colony of England. The United States colonized the Philippines and Cuba. I mean, Spain had colonies all over the world. The Netherlands had colonies. France had colonies. So that era is, for all intents and purposes, over. But a lot of people think that there's this new colonialism that still exists and is actually still quite rampant, um, depending on whom you talk to. And the difference here is that colonialism is where a country just goes in and says, "This is my country. I'm telling you what to do. Whatever. It's mine. Like I can dictate what happens. I can appoint who's ruling the country. I can take all the resources. I can do whatever I want." So that's colonialism. Whereas neo-colonialism, you don't own the country. So on paper, the country is self-governed. Now, maybe it's not a good government. Still, it's still self-governed. But the another country has a lot of sort of outsized influence on what goes on in that country through either through political means or economic means and military means, whatever. So, maybe a country stations a bunch of troops in that country. And even though the country has their own rulers or own government, they don't do anything without sort of consulting with the military of that other country. Or you invest some money in the right places and sort of influence the right economic actors in that country and therefore are able to influence political actors. And, again, the political leaders make their own decisions. These companies make their own decisions, but they really don't make decisions without consulting the other country. There's some examples of this if you look up what are the so-called banana republics in Central America that like the United Fruit Company, huge, huge corporation that was nominally private, but it was a U.S. company and it just sort of responded to what was going on in the United States, not what was going on in these countries like I think it was Nicaragua, Ecuador, I think. Anyway, so there's different ways to have a lot of influence on what happens in a country without actually colonizing it, and that's to some people what we consider neo-colonialism. So no matter what, this is a really common phenomenon, um, including things like what are often called land grabs, where countries come in, like, you have a country like, China that's doing a lot of this in African countries now. They need to feed their people, so they basically buy up a bunch of land, really good land in certain African countries like Ethiopia, and then they export that food back to China, and meanwhile, people in Ethiopia a lot of them are starving, but they can't control this land because there's a foreign entity owns it. Um, and also, There's a video here, mostly focused on Jamaica, which is interesting. It was a British colony until 1962. And then they went into debt. This is the short story. And this is another way that a lot of people say neocolonialism occurs. You have a country that goes into debt, and they need a loan. Nobody will give them a loan, so they go to places like the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank. They give them the money, but they give them the money with conditions where, they'll dictate like what happens in that country, to a large extent in terms of their economy, in particular the monetary policy and so forth. So the point is that this is really common now, where especially countries going into debt and they need a loan from the IMF. And so the IMF like has a really large say in what goes on economically in that country after they take the loan. So some people see that as a form of neocolonialism. Anyway, the video I think is really interesting, and hopefully to help you give you some insight into how this whole process works. Okay, so that's it for this week's introduction. I hope you enjoy the content.